So this one we're going to talk about access control. We're also going to talk about Active Directory and managing Active Directory, the accounts, some policies, locking out users whenever they try to log into their account too many times, different things. So we're going to talk about access controls and then account management. Account management is going to be Active Directory. In Module A, how to compare and contrast access models. And we're going to have different modeling for the way we have access. And ACL's access control list, we've looked at them on routers. These are going to be a little bit different. We're going to have the access list for permissions, basically. And then the NTFS permissions and inheritance. We've already taken a brief look at permissions. We'll look at permissions again for a few minutes. And the first one here is access control models. Implicit allow and implicit deny. We talked about that. We talked about that in access control lists. An implicit allow allows everything that we don't deny. And that's a pretty tall order, I think. So anything that you don't deny is going to be allowed or permitted. And that means that there's lots of things out there that could be permitted on your network because you didn't know to deny it. The implicit deny probably going to be safer because if we forget to permit something, not such a big deal because it's not going to destroy our network. We can always go back and add that permit to those things. And the implicit deny and the implicit allow is going to be the default action after we've done all the other things. So in the implicit deny, we looked at it in the access control list. That anything that we don't permit is denied. So we have to have at least one permit statement before anything's going to be allowed to pass through the device, typically a firewall or a router for those things. The access controls that we're talking about, these are the kind of the models. Discretionary access control, the owner does that. I create a document and then I give permissions. I can right click on it and give you permissions to read it, to write to it, to change it, to delete it, to do all sorts of different things to it. Common in file systems where the owner of the object, and everything appears as objects, controls the permissions to it. The mandatory access, administrators assign security labels. And that's going to be more like what happens in the military and government where we have labels on different documents. Could be, confidential, secret, top secret, or some of the other top secret sub-classifications. So the administrators assign the security labels, common for the military and the high security environments when we do those things. Everything has to have a label in the mandatory, even if it's unclassified. For official use only is one of the, the catch-alls down there that, yeah, we'll do for official use only, which means that you don't give it to the world to try to keep it within the organization. Rule-based, we have access rules used by routers and firewalls. And these really, when we talk about access rules, who can get on it, we're kind of talking about the access control lists that we've talked about before. Role-based access control, this is when we talked about the X.500 directory. This is one of the objects that Active Directory doesn't have that the NetWare did was a role object. And a role object says that, it's like you're the director of education or you're the IT director. And simply based upon the role that you have, your job, you get access to certain resources. I used to say the coffee mess treasurer, that you are elected coffee mess treasurer, which is always something that you don't want to be. You got to collect the dues. You need access to the books. So you would be put into that role, and you get access to all of the dues list, who's a member of the coffee mess, who's paid their dues, who hadn't paid their dues, and you'd be able to update that. Next month, let's say that Raphael is elected to the coffee mess treasurer. Then I would come out of the role and he would go in and he'd get access to those resources. So it's access to resources based upon the job that you're doing. Attribute based, and we're going to have slides on each of these. Attribute based is define attributes for the resources. And this could be the users where you are, it could be environments. There are a number of, and I got a slide that hopefully will show that a little bit better. And then the default permissions, the implicit deny is more secure. Here we have that implicit business again. What does that mean? It means that I have a home directory with a bunch of files in it, and I get explicit full control to me. That means that all the rest of you, since nobody gave you any permissions to it, you are explicitly denied. Or you're not explicitly denied, you're implicitly denied. Implicit deny. So just because I didn't give it to you means that because I gave it to me, or they gave it to me, the administrator gave it to me and didn't give it to you, I get it and you don't. The explicit deny, says implicit deny is more secure because what it does is it's like the implicit deny in the access control list. If you're not allowed, if we don't permit you or me or whoever, then you're denied. The implicit deny, if we did the implicit deny, you'd have to go to every resource and actually deny access to users. So the implicit deny is very similar to the ACLs that we talked about. And what we would use is we would use the students. And the students would have a bunch of files, we'd have resources, and under the resources we'd have subdirectories. So you give the students all got access to the resource directory. If I didn't give it to faculty, there's an implicit deny. So I could add also maybe the faculty. The administrators don't need to see this stuff, so we didn't give it to them. So all of the people that are, working the phones or whatever they're doing up front can't get to these resources. They don't need the resources. We didn't give them access to it, so they are implicitly denied, the implicit deny, which shows up in a number of things in networking because it really is a safer way to go. If I don't give it to you, if somebody doesn't give it to you, you don't get it. Discretionary access control assigned by the owner. And in this one, this is back to the Linux that we have the owner, the group, and the all other users, and we have the permissions here. The first read, write, and execute would be the owner. And I told you I use to remember it UGA, the Georgia Bulldog that we have here. The owner, the user that's on it. The read, write, and the execute, which to do these would be 1, 2, and 4 when you actually want to change them. So if we gave read, write, and execute, the permission would be 7. The next one is the group permission. In this case, it's read, so its permission would be 4. And then, actually it's read and execute, so it would be 5, wouldn't it? So it would actually be 5. The group that's assigned these permissions. And then the other users is all others. I say all others just to make UGA work. And so it would be 4. So if we were defining this thing, and the reason I write this is when you actually, at the command line in Linux, assign these permissions, you have to use the numbers like this. So the first 3 read, writes, and execute are for the owner or the user. The second 3 of the read, write, and execute is for the group that's assigned permissions here. And the last read, write, and execute is for everybody else. So the permissions are being able to read the document, to write to the document, and then to execute, would be able to execute programs in the system here. So Linux permissions, read, write, execute, written in binary. The NTFS file permissions, we have over here, I said explicit deny, explicit allow, inherited deny, or inherited allow. Principals are the owners and the groups, whoever's going to get there. The SID is a security identifier. And I put administrator 500. Some of the user names, administrator, have the same security ID forever, ever since NT4, which was in the 90s. It's been the same. The administrator's security ID has been 500. Identifies a principal. The Windows management user account, get name, SID, you can look at those. It's a long number, and I'll see if one of them will show. See if we can find one. Probably not. An ACE is an access control entries. A dynamic access control list, and an access control list controls the access control entries. The access control list is the permissions that we give, the permissions for a SID, a security ID. The permissions are the entries, the SIDs, the entries that go into the permissions are the access control entries. Let's see if we can look at some of that. And I don't know that I'm going to be able to see a SID. Maybe we can. I think if we do regedit, if it'll let me run regedit, we can see what one looks like. Maybe. So let's go HKey users. So right here, SID 1-5-529 on down the line. This is what a security ID, a SID, looks like to the system. This one would be this one would I expect be a local user, and this would be a domain user because it's got the SID along with the number of the domain that goes with it. So we have it starts with an S, and it's a whole string of characters. They are finite, they will run out, but when we make a user account, the system assigns a security ID to it. That's what actually gets the permissions, not the name. We can change the name all we want, but the SID, the security identifier, the security ID is going to stay the same for those, forever and ever and ever. If we, and go back to, if we delete that user, let's say that we had an academic director, and the academic director that we had resigned, retired, moved on. Instead of deleting that account, what you can do is to disable the account. When we disable the account, we hire a new academic director because we're going to do that. We just change the name that's on the security ID, and all the permissions stay the same. You don't have to go back and reinvent the world to allow them to have access to the resources. But what we were looking at was the permissions for this thing. And again, we have looked at this a little bit. We did the, let's go ahead here and look at demo. If I look at its properties and its shared, that's what that's all about. If I do security here, I can add users to this thing, and the users here have entries, the access control entries. This whole thing is the access control list. The entries are the users and the permissions that they have. We have full control, modify, read and execute, list folders, read, write, and down at the bottom, special permissions that might be available. If we go in here for special permissions, if I go to, let's go to this user here that has read and execute, and it says it's not inherited. We can go into the special permissions and kind of go around. It says include inheritable permission from the object's parent, which means that it would inherit, the demo would inherit from C. If I have inheritable on it, replace the existing inheritable permissions on all descendants with inheritable permissions from this object, which says that go ahead and change the permissions on all the subfolders that are under it. This one says inherit from the parent. Wasn't there, I could inherit from the parent and apply that. Sometimes it takes a long time, I don't want to do that. Inherits from the C. If I want to, let's go back to this user right here, edit. These are more precise permissions that we can get to. We have full control, traverse folder, list folder, read attributes, client files, create folder, write attributes, extend on down the line. What this takes is the general permissions, which are full control, the ones that we saw originally, and breaks them down into components. And we can then get there to do those. When I was reading Candido's, how can you went to one, if you only see one acronym, like what? I need some help with that. The acronyms are a pain. And the first time you hear all these, you say, I'll never get them. And then after you work with it for a while and do the labs, they become a little more part. RBAC, yeah, well, RBAC, rule-based and role-based are a couple of them that are kind of got the same letters, but one is rule-based and I think a lot of times they do role-based as RO so that it distinguishes them. But the RBAC and the RBAC rule or role is a problem. And that's one you just got to have context with them for that. Those are absolutely two that are so similar. And we'll get things, we'll talk about domain. When we're talking about Active Directory domain. And then we talk about a DNS domain. So depending upon how the term or the terminology or the acronym is used, it can mean a lot of different things in this world. And I think early on we said one of the big parts of networking is learning the language. It's not as simple as it seems sometimes. Sometimes it is as simple as it seems. But anyhow, we can apply these permissions to the objects and or containers within this container only, which says that we'll apply those permissions to any of the subfolders that are available to it, on it, when we do those things. So we have the access control entries are the individuals and the permissions that they get for this folder. If I want to change these things, I should be able, I guess I'm not going to let me do that, is it? I should be able to, oh yeah, we'll go to edit. That would probably work a lot better. Edit here, and we could go to this one. We have these, I could give full control. And what we have here is an allow column and a deny column. The deny always overrides the permit. If you are allowed in 72 places and denied in one, you're denied. And that's the explicit deny. We talked about the implicit deny. I give this user permissions to this folder and I didn't give it to a lot of other users. So this user and the administrator has it, the creator, owner may have permissions. Creator, owner usually has full control of them. This one I think I probably took it away. The system, this user here, the demo group, has read permissions to it. So anybody that's in the demo group would have read permissions. Carmen would have full control. If I did a deny over here, any place else in a group that Carmen's in, going to be denied. You get access, the highest level of access to any of the groups that you're a member of. And we'll look at groups when we get to the Active Directory. We'll look at some Active Directory here in a minute, but that's NTFS permissions again when we look at them. The mandatory access control, and I've got a couple of other slides, supported by some operating systems, and it's one that the military typically uses, the Bell-LaPadula model, which says no read up and no write down. In other words, if you have a secret clearance here, user on the left reading has a secret clearance. He can read below, but he can't read up. He can't read top secret. And the user has a secret clearance on the right for writing, can write up, can write to top secret, but can't write down. And the reason you want the can't write down is to prevent the inadvertent divulging of information that shouldn't be done. This is a slide that I found. It's inflexible, formal, state transition model, computer policy, describes a mandatory access rule, security, sensitivity labels on objects, and clearances for subjects. The sensitivity labels, the military, the government, the top secret, secret, confidential, and then I don't know if we're using for official use only or not. And then the clearances for the subjects. You have a secret clearance, you have a confidential clearance. You don't have a clearance, you have you have permission to go into the building. Was originally defined by DOD in the TCSEC to support multi-level security. So it was defined by DOD. Mandatory access control, no state changes. Every object's got to be labeled from the most sensitive top secret down to the least sensitive, the public. Systems divided into subjects, users, and labeled objects, whatever we're doing the classification with. The state machine with a set of allowable system states and preserves the security of information even as the system moves from one state to another state with the information flow. Only applies to secrecy, the confidentiality of information. So no write down, preventing subjects with high level access to high level data from writing the information to objects with lower access, the higher level information for those. And this is the image that it's kind of confusing, but hopefully you look at it, makes some sense. The layer of secrecy, read only. This user can read to the this would be the secret level and the confidential level, can write up but can't write down. And then in the read-write can only go to their own level. A strong property, only the same level can be accessed there. The role-based has the elements of the mandatory as well as the discretionary, and we've talked about role, no strict ownership. Permissions are assigned centrally, and roles are similar to groups. Roles, we did have a role object in a true X.500 directory. We don't have it in Active Directory. We can use groups for that, put the users in groups, and then, because we might have multiple users that need access to resources, when somebody gets promoted or somebody gets retired, I was going to say fired, we take them out of the group and they no longer have the access that they had when they were in the role. Permissions are typically additive. That means that if I'm a member of more than one group, and if I had the same resource, I'm in one group that has a read and another one has a read-write, and another one has full control, I'm going to wind up with full control. It says they're additive. You can add them up, but what happens is you get the highest level of control of any of the groups that you're in. Additive is a good way to ask test questions, is what happens to them. Rule-based, and then we'll look at one other one and take a break, but rule-based, the rules are set by the administrator, stored on the device, simple, widely used. Network access control lists, software whitelists or blacklists are going to be rule-based. Rule types are static, dynamic. The dynamic might be based on the time of day. Work late, you might want to work late to misuse them, or come in on the weekends to misuse them. The IPS intrusion prevention system may add restrictions to stop an attack. So they may be static or they may be dynamic when we do those things. At the time of day, yep, the time of day says, oh, that you're not allowed this or you're not allowed that when we do those things. Software whitelist and blacklist are probably the easiest way to see these things. The next one here, attribute-based access control lists, are based on attributes. The subject, we have the identity, location, maybe the department they're in, the IP address that we have, and then what they can do. The resource could be the type, the date, the confidentiality label. So one of them, managers of the auditing department in Brussels, can inspect the financial reports from the current financial year within office hours. So the managers, and they have to be in the auditing department, and that'll be one of the properties in Active Directory. They got to be in Brussels. That could either be by IP address or by one of the attributes in the Active Directory object. And what they can do, they can inspect, and then the object that they can inspect are the financial reports, current financial year, and then they would have to be within office hours. So we talked about the attribute-based, the different attributes. The permissions here, these are the NTFS. We can either copy or move. And there's a whole bunch of rules here. The simplified rule is that you inherit permissions of the folder that the file's going to, except when you move it on the same volume. And the reason is, when you move it on the same volume, it just changes the pointers in the directory. So it doesn't actually go from one location to the other. Copying, the way that I always imagined this was, when you copied it, it goes through the top of the folder where all of the permissions get added to it. If we move it from another volume, then it's got to come into that volume and go through the top. If we move it on the same volume, it's there in the same room, just in a different desk, so we just do a different pointer to it. So the effects when you copy or move, NTFS, when you copy files and folders, they inherit permissions of the destination. When you move files and folders within the same partition, think volume, they retain their permissions. When you move files or folders from a different partition, different volume, they inherit the permissions of the destination folder. So NTFS moves. We looked at this in the stopping permissions inheritance. We looked at this in the Active Directory server here. We have the explicit allow and the explicit denies boxed in by in the red box there. And then if we clear this checkbox, if we don't want to include inheritable permissions from the object's parent, if we don't want to inherit permissions from the folder or the volume label above it. The C would inherit, the permissions would inherit in the folders right under C from C. If we did a subdirectory, it would inherit from the parent directory. We also looked at the permissions entry, the special permissions that we have here, and we can apply these permissions to objects and our containers within this container only, which means that they're not going to be inherited. Those are the kinds of things that when we created home directories, and believe me, we had enough. What does this mean? What does that mean? What does this mean? Where you assign explicit permissions to an individual when they log on. This all happens automatically. And then they can have full control for their home directory, create folders and files and save files and do all of those other things. But you don't want anybody else to be able to get there. You don't want it to inherit from the C drive. You don't want a lot of other things to happen. Yet the administrator still got to have permissions, because if you get a hit on an antivirus, you got to go check it out. So the manipulation of the permissions can be, quite the mystery in order to figure out the things that we really want to do with it. So we're going to get into some Active Directory stuff here about Active Directory user management, create groups and other objects, and about group policy objects and how to enforce account policies in Windows. So this is the Active Directory fire hose treatment, because you can have a whole 10-week course on Active Directory. So this is the overview, the broad view, the 1,000-foot view of Active Directory. The account types, ordinary users, you've experienced that because probably you've used Windows. You may have been a user. You're probably a user for everybody that's logged on at one of the LeaderQuest facilities. Privileged users are these administrator folks, the people that have privileges that are greater than the user privileges. Users can just use the computers. They can use the resources. Shared or generic. Shared account types, not really such a good idea, but we have those. And generic, we have the generic, maybe like the guest is made, is a generic account that has been made. And then we have the guest account, which is designed to allow users who come from outside of your enterprise to be able to get access to some resources. The guest account has like no permissions that are available. Service accounts we use to run services on the network. Maybe to, we could use a service account, would have a username and a password, and we give it permission to run, let's say antivirus scans would be a service account. So service accounts run services on the network itself. This is the Active Directory objects. So we have this group of users here. I want to just go back to my server and hopefully you can see these things. Let's see if we can do a full screen, make it a little better maybe, except now, there it is. I can't get to the stuff that I need. I should unpin that. I didn't want to do that. Maybe I'll do that to do my Control-Alt-Delete. And then we'll go back to the full screen. We'll get back onto it. Nice timeout on it, isn't it? I'll go to full screen here. So in this one is going to be, and in the administrative tools will be Active Directory, users, and computers. Actually, that's not what it's going to be. it's going to be, yeah, it's Active Directory. Yeah, it is too, Active Directory users and computers. I haven't done Active Directory in a while. We have these built-in users, the administrator. Well, this one's not a built-in. This is one that I created. But cert publishers, the two little guys here are groups. And we normally add users to groups, and then we give the groups permissions. Because if you were doing students, for instance, and you had, I don't know, 400 or 500 students, or even 50 students, instead of going and giving permissions to each one individually, we can create a students group, and then we can go in here and do this, a new group, and let's make it a global group, and we'll call it students. Can't get my fingers on the right keys. Students. So we'll create this guy as a security group. We have two types of groups here. A security group. Security groups can be given permissions. They can be given access to resources. A distribution group is designed for an email group. It can't get access to resources. Yeah, I forgot the T. Thank you. Students. So we have this group, and now in this group, add to group, I can go in here and under the advanced find now, I got a whole bunch. I can add groups to it, or I can add users to it. We can add a couple of groups to it. When we do that, we'll add the demo group to it. So now the demo group was successfully completed. So if I look into the students, members, and a member of, it's a member of, we added it to the demo group. The members here I can add, and then in the advanced and do the find now. This is the cheap way of doing it. Let's add administrators, and I can select multiples with the control key. Okay, now these users are a member of that group. If I then wanted to give permissions, go back to our demo folder here and go to permissions, or properties, and then go to security, and what we want to do is to add these users to it. I told you it's been a long time to change permissions. Yeah, see, that's not, well, then we're going to add, and then we're going to add, what was it, students. Let's check names. If you just started and it's unique, it'll find what's there. So we can add the students group here, and the defaults are read, execute, list folders, and then read. So basically the read, write, and execute are the permissions. If I wanted to give full control, I would just click on it, and now those users have full control to this folder. If I go back to it, I don't want to go back to it. If I go back to the permissions here, and we had security, because Carmen has got read and execute and list and read as an individual. But Carmen was a member of the students group, which got full control. So those permissions are going to add, and she's going to have full control permission to it. One of the things that happens sometimes is we forget about when people get promoted or moved around or different things, and you've got to go back in and change those permissions. You also could, if we, I think, wanted to find the effective permissions of, let's say, of Carmen. Check names, Carmen here. Then the system will calculate for me the effective or the total permissions for an individual user or a group. So instead of having to go back and actually do the manual calculation, which you had to do before some of the later revisions of Active Directory, you can just ask it to do that for you. Oh, let's see, where am I? I want to get that over here. So we looked at a user. We can have a contact. A contact would be an email contact. We can have objects for computers, printers, shared folder objects, and these are just objects. They're not the folder itself. It's an object to allow you to use it in Active Directory to move things. We never actually used the shared folder very much. We used users, computers, and printers occasionally to control different properties of it or permissions to it. We looked at the groups, two types of groups: the security group, which can have access to security information, to folders, or to printers, to resources, and the distribution group, which is used for email. The other one here is organizational unit, and we'll go back to it real quickly. Organizational unit is just a way to administratively group users together so that we can give them certain properties. This is an OU. It's got the demo group in it. It's got Henry Owens spelled wrong, Jack Jones, and James Jones are in here. If I go into here, I can delegate control. I could delegate control to somebody if I wanted maybe Carmen to have access to this. I could add them, and then next, and then what I want that user to be able to do, because by default users can't do anything in here. Maybe I want them to be able to create and delete group managements. Typically what you're going to do is reset user passwords, because what happens is that users forget their passwords. And if you, as the network administrator, got 300 or 400 people and 15 or 20 of them are trying to get their password reset on a regular basis, you may want to delegate that authority to somebody else, somebody that's in that organization, and the organizational units are used to group them together. We might have one for students. We had one for students. We had one for faculty. We had one for admin. We had one for nurses. And then when we got nursing students and IT students, we broke the students up into nursing students and IT students because they needed different resources. They needed different kinds of management. So it is an administrative method to allow us to manage groups of individuals together when we do those things. Creating the Active Directory objects, we did that. We created a group, security group, distribution group. The scope here says domain, local, global, or universal. This is a Windows concept. A domain local group is one that gets the local groups. The way this works, here we go. The way this works is we have users, and users go into global groups, and global groups go into local groups, and local groups get access to resources. So if you wanted to allow somebody to have permission to print on a printer, for instance, you would make a local group, maybe printer. You could have a number of global groups, because global groups, multiple global groups can go in here from any domain. Users from your own domain can go into the local groups. So the users go into global groups. Multiple global groups can go into the local groups. Users can go into the global groups from their own domain. I'll get this right in a second. So we wanted to allow those. So we make this global group in multiple locations. We have a global group here for maybe for students. And then we have a global group for admin. We have a global group for faculty. So the individuals that we want to be able to print go into these global groups. The global groups get added to the local group. And the local group sets what they can do to the resource. So we have Henry here that can print. So Henry is abusing his print privileges. He's using too much paper or whatever else. We take Henry out of the group. We don't have to do anything else except take him out of the group. In Active Directory, centrally. We don't have to remote desktop to anything else. We don't have to go to the printer to assign permissions. We don't have to go to the share to do these things. We only have to take him out of the global group. So then his permissions are taken away. And then we get a new user in here, John. And John needs permission to print. We just put him into the, over here, the user, we put him into the global group, and now he has access to that resource. It looks like an roundabout way to do things, and it kind of is. When I first saw it, I said, this is crazy. But when you have large enterprises with multiple domains or multiple groups, multiple OUs that have multiple groups within them, it's a way to control access to resources once you get it set up. That all you got to do is put people in and out of the global groups that are available to them. Group scopes, which we kind of talked about, domain, local. Before we convert the server to a domain or the system to a domain controller, we have local groups. And local groups are on the local computer. Once we add Active Directory, we don't have those anymore. We have domain local groups, which are within the domain, visible in their own domain, can contain most objects, and can only belong to other domain local groups. Best used to assign permissions. So we're going to assign permissions using these things. The global groups, visible everywhere, can contain objects in the same domain, can belong to any universal or domain local group. So that's why we put the users in the global groups. Can belong to any universal or local group, and the best used to organize users. So the users go into global groups go into local groups, and local groups get access to resources. The universal group can be kind of a catch-all here. Visible everywhere, can contain objects from any domain, can belong to any universal or local group, and it's best used to nest global groups. It's kind of a specialized group that allows users from anywhere to be put into it. So that if we had, I don't know, maybe users from the Denver office and users from the Jacksonville office and users from the Dallas office, and they're all in different domains, we could put them in a universal group and give them permissions to access a file at Denver at the headquarters activity. That's what the way a universal group would be used, so that we didn't have to go through creating all the global groups in a domain local and putting them into that group. Managing objects, when we look at the objects, they've got a lot of attributes. If we look at one of these guys, member of the groups, he's a member of the domain users, remote control, whether he can use remote control, permissions to control or observe the session, select the object below, require permissions, and interact with the session, remotely control or use the sessions. And these things jump around. The general, the name, description. These are some of the attributes that we kind of talked about. The description here, maybe telephone number, email, web page if they have one. The office, well, that could be one of the attributes that we restrict access with. Address, and I'll try to go across one of these things, a street. And these could be used for searches if we needed to do that. Maybe a certain zip code, something's going to happen. And you may want to find all your users that are in a floodplain or that were affected by the tornado or the hurricane that goes on. The account itself, we have a logon name, @sec plus, and then, or the pre-Windows, you can use either, you can use the which, and the @sec+.local. The .local is the one the prefix or the suffix that you normally use for the local one, so that you don't actually try to do things. We could do logon hours, log on to all computers, the following computers. We could restrict specific computers, force them to change a password, keep a password forever, not allow them to change passwords, which I never thought was a good idea. If they have a profile or a logon script, and these are things that would be executed at logon. The logon script might map directories, for instance. Telephones, we have the telephone numbers for the users, the organizations, job title, department, more attributes that we could use for that, for the attribute. Member of, dial in, whether they can, network access permission, callback options, and the dial-in. This was when they really did use dial-in, control through the network policy server. The callback was, we could put in a number here so that somebody that was working remotely and they dialed in to be sure that they weren't at the local bar, that you would dial back to their house. And then they would have to answer. The other thing would be when you had long distance phone calls, they wouldn't be charged for the call. Let's see, environment, starting programs, sessions. So kind of a look at the attributes that are available in the users here. And we looked at these things, select the users, the locations, the names. We can add multiples at one time. We can add, when we're doing permissions here, we can add multiple users or adding them to the groups or whatever we're doing with them. Multiples at the same time. The delegate control wizard, we looked at that. That's the delegate control or delegate to do certain things here in an organizational unit, in an OU, the delegate control. Next, and we'll add Carmen again. And then the delegate control, and these don't get any bigger, as you can see there. Create, delete, manage user accounts, reset passwords, enforce passwords, change at next logon, read all user information, create, delete, manage groups. So you can get an idea that we can delegate as much control as we want to delegate to a user, or as we need to. This could be like, the group or work group administrators that would do these things. The group policies allow us to control what goes on a system, group of system, and a domain centrally, because we're going to make our computers and make our users, they're going to be an Active Directory. We can then, we have a default domain policy here that we have settings that are available in it, Windows settings, things that we've done. This is a shortcut. Let me see if I can actually get to one of these things and get to the edit portion, and it's not going to allow me. I'm supposed to be able to edit these things. Well, we'll make I don't want that, a new policy, and we can look at these things. Demo 3. I can't edit it either. Well, that's no fun. What we have in them, or we're supposed to have in them, are all of the things that we can manage. The settings here What if it's just not reading itself? Let me try restarting the group policy manager, see if that does anything. Probably not. It's always one of these things has got to be a pain. And group policy status is enabled. Well, I'm not going to show.
Are you looking for demo 3 you just created?
Now, I'm looking for one that'll actually let me edit to get into, oh, there it is. It's going to let me edit that one now, finally. I guess I just had to figure it out. Yeah, when we go into policies, the things that we can do, software settings, we can automatically, by policy, we can install software after we create what we need to that. The new package here, a Windows installer, an MSI. If you get a Windows package with an MSI installer, you can do that. You can either do that based on the computer configuration to the computers, or we can do it with users so that only certain users are able to or get certain programs installed for them. We can have Windows settings here, folder redirection. Internet Explorer is one that's always kind of interesting when you look at it. URLs here, favorite URLs, important URLs. Connection. If I wanted to force a proxy server, I can go in here and put the address of the proxy server in, and then when they logged onto Active Directory, they'd automatically get a proxy server. Folder redirection, and then we have some templates here. The big one is Windows settings, and then the security settings that are available if it will open them for me. Here we go. We have account policies, and this is the password policy, the history. How many passwords is it going to remember? The maximum password age. How long can you keep the password? The minimum password age. How long do you have to keep the password? And that's so that you don't, change a password and then go right back to the original. So it actually makes you change it. The minimum password, complexity requirements, whether it has to be a complex password, and then the lockout policy. How long it's going to be locked out, the threshold, how many times you type in your password wrong and then your account gets locked, how long does it get locked for? You're improperly typed in so many times over a certain period of time. And the Kerberos policies. Local policies, these are things that are available. All the local policies and the account policies you can configure on a workstation. Some of these others we can't, but the policies control things that happen on the entire domain where we apply the policies to when we look at those things. Computer and user, we have computer scripts, we have startup scripts and shutdown scripts. Startup scripts would do things to the machine, obviously. Maybe we're going to set a background. Policies can do that. We can set a background. We could install a software. We could force the users to change their passwords. Local policies, quick look at them, and then restricted groups. Restricted groups are the ones that we set up that people can't make changes to them. We can configure the firewall in advanced security. We can turn the firewall on, we can turn the firewall off. We can punch holes in the firewall, make exceptions to the firewall. Software restriction policies, we looked at that. We can whitelist those earlier, we looked at that. We can whitelist applications. We can blacklist applications. And then the users, we have scripts, folder redirection. Folder redirection is something to know about because the default save location is on the local computer. And when you're in an organization, or let's say like a school, and you don't necessarily sit at the same computer every day, and you've been there, done that. I saved my resume and I can't find it now. It's not in the it's not in the folder on my computer. Well, okay, you're sitting here in room 107 and you saved it in room 103. It's on that computer. What folder redirection will do is redirect all the saves to their home directory on the central server. The other advantage there is that the things get saved centrally. It's easier to back them up. We can do software settings, and then there are some administrative templates that are in there too. Group policies, the local GPO is set on the current computer. This thing down here is LSD. We're going to LSD OU. Local site domain and then OU. These are the order that the policies get applied in. And what that means is, in the easiest way, let's say that we have background colors. And let's say that the local policy says the background is red. And the site says that it is purple. The site's where you are. And the domain says that it's yellow. And the domain is all of the OUs. And then the OU says that it's blue. And the child OU says that it is deep blue. I don't know. So what happens when you log on, the first thing that happens is the local policy gets set and the background's red. We read the site policy and it overwrites the local policy, sets it to purple. The domain overwrites the site, sets it to yellow. And then the organizational overwrites the domain and sets it to blue. And then the child OU to the deep blue. The one furthest into the Active Directory is going to be the one that's going to win in these things. So the local site domain and then OU are the order that the policies get applied to the system. Some of the things that we looked at, password policy, we looked at that, the minimum, the maximum, history, 24 passwords remembered, how many, and that means that 24, after 24 passwords, you can reuse one of them. The minimum, account lockout policy, we talked a little bit about. Auditing policy can be set here. Event logs, what's going to happen with them. User rights assignments, and the rights are permissions. We have permissions, and I keep using the term permissions. Permissions is the permission to use a resource. Rights is the ability to change something on the computer. So we could assign the user a right to change the background color. We could assign a user a right to maybe put in a static IP address. Probably wouldn't want to do that, but those are what the rights are. And then we have some security options, IPsec, and those sorts of things can be configured there. User accounts, define policies and then enforce them. Strong but manageable passwords. The lockout policy, we used to have one that was if you missed your password was, I think it was 5 times in 5 minutes, you were locked out for 5 minutes. And then we got a lot of untech people who missed regularly their password 5 times in 5 minutes. So we changed it to 10 times in 1 minute, which you couldn't do. So people really didn't get locked out. The lockout policy is to prevent or mitigate denial, brute force attacks on the system. Credential management on these things, who has what permissions. When we do those things, disable unneeded accounts. Disable them until you are absolutely sure that nobody is going to need that account again. And then you can not just disable it, you can delete it and make it go away. Because anything that's there is a threat from a hacker. Disable unneeded accounts, assign group permissions. We talked about that and how to do that. Instead of trying to do everybody individually, we're going to do them as groups, much easier to manage that way. Avoid generic accounts that we make that multiple users are going to have to be able to use. 2 accounts for administrators. One is the administrator's account. The other is the regular user account. They should always be logged on as the regular user. And then when they're going to do administration, right-click on the executable and run as the administrator. Because that way you have a lot less opportunity to do serious damage to the network. Continuous review, audit logs, and review user access settings. What can users do? Is somebody changing that? And that's one of the policies that you can enable is an audit, so that you kind of get notifications when people make certain changes to the Active Directory. Auditing logs are enabled and reviewed regularly. Disabled accounts no longer needed. We can have automatic expiration dates. These are generally for temporary workers coming in to do contractors that may need access. You can have them expire automatically. You might violate regulatory requirements for data retention. Consider making the disabled accounts inactive. Regularly review and recertify. Consider third-party scripts or tools, and there are a lot of scripts that are available. We had one that we could add because you start students on a regular basis. You need to add them to the system. We had scripts that we could add a lot of students, like 40, 50 at a time, and put them in groups, have them create home directories and all that using a script. Scripting is the way you want to go if you can do that. You don't have to be a scripter. There are a lot of scripts that are available to help you out in Active Directory. This is a security template in Notepad. We have the Unicode here. Unicode is, yes, the version. Signature, revision 1, minimum password length, password complexity. You obviously got to know what all of the codes mean when we write these things, but this is what a template might look like for one of these things. And then the security templates. We have a security template which are pre-configured. It's Microsoft's idea of what the different securities are for Active Directory, for the policies that we have. What you can do is to compare your current settings with what they say is secure. It could be a secure server, a secure domain controller, a secure workstation. And if you want, you can have it configure things to what they say. But if you say OK at the end, it's going to configure them. So you can compare it to the template, and you can apply them if you'd like. You may or may not want to apply these things. We just use them to do the comparison, to say, yeah, we kind of like what we've got. And you may or may not like what you've got or what Microsoft thinks is better for you.